I'm Matt Gray, and I'm joined weekly by Dr. J. We're both certified financial planners, and we talk about how child-free life impacts your finances. This is Child-Free Life and Money.
This is Matt Gray, joined by Dr. J. Again, episode 2 of the Child-Free Life and Money podcast. Today, we are going to be covering quite a sensitive topic and a topical one as well. We're going to be talking about Roe v. Wade, how the Supreme Court has overturned it and what that means for the child-free community. And also maybe kind of what that looks like coming down the pike as things could potentially cascade a little bit. I think a lot of people are quite aware of the potential legal implications. We're not attorneys, we're not lawmakers, but we're quite involved with the people that this impacts. So let's jump right in and talk a bit about the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned and what that might mean, particularly Dr. J, from where you are. I'm in Colorado. We're not one of the states who has automatic triggering laws or anything like that in regards to abortion. I don't know if Mississippi is one, but I would just generally guess that where you are, there's going to be more of an impact. So tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I got to call it out. I mean, we're two guys talking about this, and you know that it's a little hard for us. I mean, it affects us, but not the same way as right. It does affect women. It's just that the reality of it.
Correct.
And yeah, I'm in Mississippi. Okay, I'm not hating on the state. We just moved here a year ago. We moved for my wife's job, and my wife and I had the discussion, kind of going, "Are we staying?" And we are, but Mississippi's interesting. So fun ones of this, the Dobbs case that caused all this came out of Mississippi. It's a little scary to run a child-free financial planning firm in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. I've had to, do a lot of interesting things and look at the legalese of this. We'll get to that later, but I think that the challenge is each state is now doing its own thing. And when I've been having discussions with people and saying, "Hey, what about this? What about that?" It feels almost like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. What about this? But our governor publicly came out the other day and said, "Well, we're not right now talking about outlawing contraception." Like, not right now? What does that mean? Like, and yes, we have a trigger law, so now all abortions essentially are illegal. Our governor's also publicly come out and said, we're not tapping your phones and we're not reading your mail, but. And I'm like, but what? Like, right. What do you do? Like, it is kooky. Let's call it that. It's also very scary. There's a huge public health component of this, a huge rights, privacy. I don't know where we're going to end up as far as a country and a state. I'm a little worried. I'm a lot worried, but I just wanted to play nice on it. And I think, my wife and I, she's in public health, and we've been having a lot of good discussions about it. And it's hard. I don't know how we all make it through it without like giving each other a hug and just kind of like holding hands and going, all right, we'll be okay.
Right.
But it's impacting all areas of our life, especially in the child-free community.
Right. Yeah, there are a number of states. Again, I'm not that familiar with Mississippi. I think Texas is the one that's more in the news, probably due to it's Texas and it's a big state, about the very broad definition of what it means to be involved with an abortion, whether or not you know the rights you have if you know someone who's going to be getting an abortion or things like that. There are some pretty interesting ways that citizens are now becoming potentially law enforcement on that front, which is, to your point, quite scary and pretty impactful. So with that all said, there are a number of states, Arkansas, Idaho, Louisiana, just checking my notes here, Kentucky, South Dakota, Mississippi is on the list, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, like just to name, that's not all of them, I don't think, but automatic triggering laws. I think there are 21 that had automatic trigger laws, and then there's another handful that are working towards legislation at this point. So with that, there are some of the things that particularly impact the child-free community, like the obvious one is women now cannot go get medical treatment that they would need to prevent them from having children if they were to get pregnant in many states. So that's a huge one. But knowing that in the child-free community, you kind of brought this up a little bit about contraceptives and things like that. A lot of people in the child-free community explore permanent contraception of various types, and now that could theoretically be under attack. So we'll want to get into that a little bit. But I guess the other thing that we may want to explore a bit more as well is the fact that the Dobbs case was realistically, it was about an abortion, but it was about medical privacy. And so as we go forward, is something, and maybe this is where these two things tie, permanent contraception and medical privacy, like maybe that's now accessible to the state, and do they retroactively persecute based off of those types of actions? And so, hopefully today we'll get into a little bit about where people can go to be proactive about this if they so choose to, permanent contraceptives, operations, things like that. And then maybe we can provide some resources afterward as well, if we can track some down as to where people can go. But with all of that, I know you're a little bit more plugged into the community in terms of things like permanent contraception. So have you seen the ruling to repeal Roe v. Wade impact that at all? Or what have you seen across the board there?
Well, I think the challenge is going to be right now under Obamacare or ACA. ACA compliant plans have to cover one version of permanent contraception. So, tubes tied or, vasectomy, they don't specify which, it can be whatever, but one for each sex. And the challenge with that is each state can now change that rule. Mm-hmm. So they go, nope, not in our state. Well, that's going to get interesting. So right now is the time to do it. I just saw an article, vasectomy requests are up 600%. Rightfully so. I'm in that group.
I'm in that group at this point.
Did you get scheduled?
I have not gotten scheduled yet. Because of my health issues, I have to go to like a number of different doctors because there's this domino effect of I'm on immunosuppressants and there's medicine changes and all kinds of stuff. But I'm going through that process at this point.
Yeah, and my wife and I had that taken care of a long time ago. But it's I was just listening on actually on MSNBC this morning. They were talking about people choosing, to get the tube side, and doctors, are actually now doing group sessions to kind of get the information. We've always had on the Childfree Reddit a list of friendly doctors because part of the challenge is not all doctors are willing to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't get how a doctor goes, oh, you're too young to have your tubes tied and you can't. And I'm like, that's not their opinion. Like, right. Luckily, when my wife and she had a medical issue and we chose for her to do it, it was about the doctor was like, yep, you're an adult, do your thing. Like, right. But that was in the Northeast where that's more accepted. I think some states it's a little bit more challenging. Also a OBGYN posted on, I think it was TikTok, a huge list of doctors that are growing. There's doctors that are willing to do it. Right. If, by the way, if you're going to do it, time to do it is now, because I don't know if it's going to be covered in the future. I just don't. Right. And anyone that says they know is lying. Right. Each week, states come up with something different. The one that I'm watching is whether or not it's going to be illegal to cross state lines. So
right. Yeah, you and I have talked a little bit about that before. So
yeah, we're actually recording this a little bit before it's out because we're trying to be prepared. And in July, the Senate tried to pass a law saying it's okay to cross state lines, and that failed. So some states are now saying, hey, yeah, it's illegal to cross state lines. The one I'm watching is it going to then be illegal to move? Like, right. Can I move for my reproductive rights? I don't know. Right. The one that's really scaring me right now, the Texas law is a big one because it's a civil fine. But let me share you my nightmare, Matt. My nightmare is somebody does a GoFundMe for healthcare, for abortion or reproductive rights, which happens because healthcare in the United States sucks. That's a separate discussion. We probably have a different topic on that one.
Yeah.
But we do a GoFundMe and 15 people put in some money.
Right.
Each of those 15 people now technically have aided and abetted in Texas language for that abortion, and now can be sued for 10 grand a piece.
Right. Right.
I don't know how you do that. Like, and saying, oh, we're going camping or whatever, doesn't change it.
Right.
I have no clue how we provide support appropriately. The bottom line is we're all going to take risks. I also just was having a great discussion. There was an article look at, are your health records protected? And the answer is not really.
Right.
So let me go through this one because this is just kooky. This is wacky. So the laws say, like, so for example, right now we're talking about monkeypox is one of the new ones.
Right.
If I have a communicable disease or something that's a safety issue, it's reported to the state. Well, people are going, well, if you have an abortion, that has to be reported to the state also. Each state has its own thing, and that actually would get around the HIPAA and privacy and say, essentially, you have no privacy.
Right.
I have no clue where healthcare providers are going to end up or what. We have to change through all the laws. We have to figure out how to protect our privacy. People talk about apps and being tracked there. I don't know. We all need to, be very mindful of who we're talking about and what and how we share information.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've reopened Pandora's box here in terms of what is going to be legal and not. And I mean, indisputably, this is a rollback of, I would say, 98% of it's women's rights here. Maybe it'll impact men in terms of, medical privacy or things like that a little bit. But for the most part, I think it's a huge rollback. And how do you navigate that going forward? And maybe this is something we'll have to revisit down the line to bring in more experts, maybe in the medical field, to talk to us about how to do this and what makes the most sense. But at this point, given that these laws are changing, I mean, you just mentioned how a lot of laws have to change. That, I think, is going to be pretty significant in terms of the time it takes to get all that ironed out. Are you seeing, again, I'm referring to you as the expert here, you're more plugged into this stuff than I am, but are you seeing anything, or have you read anything about laws that are changing immediately, other than the trigger laws that are saying, like, while we get this figured out, we're going to put a Band-Aid law in place to make sure that people aren't going and doing these types of things?
Yeah, so there are a couple states now trying to pass rules about crossing state lines.
Right.
And by the way, I am not a lawyer on it, and I have no clue how that's legal.
We should disclose all that. We're not attorneys. We don't know.
How can you legally say I can't cross a state to go to dinner? I'm just making it up, but
right.
Kooky stuff. I think the other one that you're going to see is there are already states and other governmental agencies talking about attacking same-sex marriage, based on the Roe. And what's going to happen is a couple states, I'm sure, are going to say, hey, nope, same-sex marriage is no good, which, by the way, nullifies all of the protections of being married. So that includes your will, your healthcare proxy, all needs to be done, a power of attorney, a whole lot of paperwork there to protect yourself. And they can do that overnight. Now, by the way, that would then go to the Supreme Court and have to get through the court thing. But that law might be in effect until then, depending on what happens. I have no clue. I will say that living in Mississippi and watching our government, it's a hot button. They're changing rules and they're on it. And the trigger law came in. There was a court case that got overturned pretty quick, and they're like, yep, it's a priority. I'm not sure if government agencies are now going to be required to be mandated reporters. I don't know.
Right.
It is scary. And I think the only thing we can do is make sure we're protecting ourselves and our community.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the big piece. And admittedly, this is a really shocking thing for me, but just kind of like a lot of things that aren't immediately in your neighborhood or your city or anything like that. Sometimes it's kind of hard to grasp the magnitude of something. And I think, admittedly, I'm kind of in that camp now. I grew up on the West Coast, which, not about my own politics, but I think politically says a lot about the environment that I grew up in. And then also I currently live in Colorado, which is historically a purple state, but now is quite blue because of the booming population of Denver, which is where I'm based. So with that, to me, I kind of see all this stuff happening and I'm like, oh, wow, I can't believe they did that. But I'm in a state that's going to take care of us. And so it feels further away, I suppose. It doesn't feel like it's knocking on my door. And I think you're right. Something that people can do right now, regardless of where you are, is if you've been considering doing some kind of permanent contraception, is do it. Go line it up and get it done. But I think it's really interesting to see how that seems so far away, but also there are glimmers of hope in some regards. you just brought up the like LGBTQ marriage, gay marriage, all these types of things that were potentially going to be under attack next. And I think even in the ruling of Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court brought them up and said, well, basically we can say Roe v. Wade was ruled on very poor, weak explanations and poor legal interpretation, all this kind of stuff, which actually opens up the door to saying that it was basically, that's what was used as the basis to permit gay marriage. But now, as of a few weeks ago now, Congress had passed legislation to help protect gay marriage and a number of other things, where there was in the House quite a bit of Republican support there, which you typically wouldn't see. So it looks like some lines are potentially being drawn at this point, not necessarily to birth control and contraceptives, but to the reach that Roe v. Wade and the doomsday scenarios, the Handmaid's Tale scenarios that a lot of people have brought up, seem to be getting kind of headed off at this point.
Hold on, man. I'm gonna challenge you. I swear I'm living in Handmaid's Tale already down here. Okay, so I think it depends on the area. Right. And I've lived across the country, and I was in the Northeast. A bunch of states are sanctuary states now for reproductive rights.
Right.
I think the hard part is we are in a different world, you and I.
Right.
Okay? You're in Colorado, heavily blue. I'm Mississippi, heavily red, and I'm not just talking about the colors, just a different approach.
Totally.
And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, the governor came out and said, "Hey, it's a great day. We're going to have more babies. We're going to have more births. And I'm like, dude, what?"
Yeah.
And let's go kooky. And kookie's the only word I can use for it because I have no other word for it. IVF is now illegal in many states,
right?
Because you fertilize an egg, and those other eggs are now abortions.
Right.
IUDs are illegal in many states. Like, we're talking about things that go beyond, just the child-free community and reproductive rights. We're talking about everything. And then I was listening to talk the other day, a dermatologist was talking about med he gives for, skin issues that he can no longer get because the pharmacy can't give it out because it gives for abortions also.
Right.
I'm losing my mind over here, and you're over there in Colorado going, "I'm good. We're gonna hang out."
Making me seem like an asshole, but yeah, fair enough. Like, I think it's a perfect explanation of the fact that we're in very different environments. And to me, I could even say something like, "Oh, it feels like we're going to the Handmaid's Tale." You're like, "That was 5 years ago. We're there." And so I think it's very much so a interesting commentary about how things are quite different. So with that being said, for instance, Colorado's governor is gay. Like, we elected a gay governor. So it gives you an idea of kind of what types of protections we'll probably have in our state if the governor has anything to say about it, as opposed to Mississippi, who's like celebrating the fact that abortion's gone. Quite different. So with that being said, though, you kind of mentioned IVF is illegal. IUDs could be illegal in some states now. There's all kinds of things like that, which touches on the broad definition of what abortion is. And it often makes headlines when someone will have a miscarriage, say, and then they're basically, charged with abortion or having an abortion. And that's happened a number of times. Again, often it makes headlines because it's kind of ridiculous. But that's something that I think is going to be much more common as well. So in terms of abortion, I think in pop culture, there's a definition of abortion where it's an intervened loss of an embryo or fetus, basically, where we intentionally did it. But we've seen historically that it doesn't even necessarily have to be intentional, where if you just lose a baby, you could potentially be at risk. So for instance, miscarriages are quite common. Maybe not most, I don't really know how to say this where it's factual, but many people maybe don't understand how often they occur, particularly men. So with that, how does that impact, like, the broad definition of abortion? How far could it go potentially where things will basically be considered an abortion by the law in these states?
Well, and I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and I will tell you, in the financial planning community, it's kind of like, there's this people go, "Well, does it really impact finances?" Absolutely it does, in my mind. I'm a little biased, okay? I think it's core to what we do. But they said to me, and they said, "Well, there was this executive action that's protecting abortions." Well, no. What the executive action did, which makes sense, is we're going to get technical here for a second, these EMTALA rules, which says if you show up at a hospital, like you have no insurance, your arm's falling off, they have to fix that arm. It's just emergency care. Also goes for OBGYN. And so if a woman shows up to a hospital with an ectopic pregnancy, the executive order says you need to treat that at that hospital. It's a life-threatening emergency.
Right.
The states are going, not so fast. And I'm like, whoa, you're like, somebody's in the hospital, could die immediately. And you're going, we're going to ship them to another state.
Right.
What? And by the way, the doctors are going, I don't know. So I was just listening to a doctor talk about this. She's an OBGYN. She goes, look, I do my medical thing. Then I call the hospital's lawyers and go, here's my case.
Right.
And they have to decide if it meets these. And I'm like, the patient is dying on the table.
Right.
And we're calling a lawyer.
Right.
That's where I'm like, what? Like, what world are we in? And now, by the way, Colorado, not an issue.
Right.
So we're talking about somebody who would die in many states and in Colorado live.
Right.
I don't get that.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, we could go down philosophical debates about the value of a life and the mother's life, the baby's life, all kinds of things like that. But I think part of the scariness now, to your point early on in this conversation, you said it's very scary right now. And I think part of that is because, well, one, we don't know how far it can go. Like, we didn't really think Roe v. Wade would have been overturned. Got past 50 years ago. How many times do we reverse laws that are 50 years old? Not often, or at least not ones that we would do it to increase rights, not decrease rights. So with that as well, and the whole abortion aspect of these treatment is, we can go down all these philosophical aspects of what is the life that's more valuable and who should be treated, things like that. But it really is a very scary time because of the unknown, because of, what is possible on the negative side, but also, even if it is legal, we don't know if it's legal. So doctors can't make the life-saving treatment fast enough because we're in this, which is very often occurs when new laws get passed or repealed. Well, how does that ripple through to all these other laws? For instance, if you can't leave the state for medical treatment and your state won't treat an ectopic pregnancy, what do you do?
I have no clue.
Well, sorry, you're done. You're now terminal. I don't know.
So the other day I met, so Matt and I are both investment advisors. We're regulated by the states, and we have more compliance things we have to do than you'd ever believe. But I went to my compliance consultant and I said, hey, am I crazy? And I went down this whole list of, what about privacy and my client files and how to protect my clients and all this. And I spent an hour with them, and I got to the end, and I was hoping they say, you're crazy, you don't have to worry about any of this. And they're like, no, that's a real concern. I'm like, okay, well, how do I do it? And I'm having to actually redesign my company and structure and because of the state I'm in and worried about protecting my client files and all that. And I'm like losing sleep over this, but I have no choice. And I'm hoping somebody at some point says to me, that's a tinfoil hat, you're crazy, whatever. But everybody, I'm talking to lawyers and having people help me out and paying way too. They're all going, yeah, we have to do some work to protect your clients, to protect child-free folks, to protect privacy. And I'm like, why? Like, we shouldn't have to. Right. I should just be crazy for worrying about it. And I guess I'm not. I mean, you think I'm crazy because you're in Colorado and you got protections there, but
I actually don't think you're crazy is the thing, is because, all right, so there's attorney-client privilege, right? They have the ability to keep that information private. You can't just go in and take that information from them. They've said it in confidence. There isn't really advisor-client privilege. There's not that same protection there. And if you do have these broad laws about aiding and abetting abortion or whatever it is, and you had a client who mentioned to you that they're actually funding someone's trip across state lines to go get an abortion or something like that, when that's illegal, someone just confided in you that they're participating in now illegal activity where you don't have the information protection that an attorney might have. So now we're at the point that, if someone does come in, and so everyone knows your financial planner They get audited, they get reviewed by regulatory bodies quite often. And part of what they do is they look at your call notes, meeting notes, emails, things like that. So given that, Dr. J, you could have a client say, I want to help my sister get an abortion. I'm giving them $5,000 to kind of make the trip to do it. Well, now they've just funded an illegal activity. They're basically the equivalent to a drug dealer in this state now. And they could.
Well, drugs are illegal in Colorado too, right? So, I mean.
Well, yes. Yeah.
You guys have a whole different world, but yeah, you're right on. And my thing is, if my company goes down because of it, I'm okay with that. Like, I'll take the hit.
Right.
But I want to make sure my clients are protected.
Right.
And that's difference in how am I doing notes and how I do a structure and how my business structure, all of that to protect it. And I think we don't think about those things.
Right.
So, okay, let me give you a dumb example, but I think this is real. So Matt, I'm moving out of my state and I say to my realtor just in passing for reproductive rights.
Right.
Is that legal now? I don't know.
Right.
Like, and by the way, there's no realtor protection either. Like,
right.
By the way, if you are moving out of your state because of politics, you're just moving for better weather. Job opportunities. I mean, and I'm like, why are we having to hide stuff? The drug example is probably a good example. I'm like, all right, state by state, they have we should be able to live our own life. And if we're not interfering with other people, be okay with it. I think this is a time for us, the child-free community, to do it. We're not a small community. We're a growing community. If you look at the generational data, each generation is higher and higher percentage that are not having kids. We need to, I'm not going to get political on who you need to vote for, but you need to vote, you need to do your thing, but realistically, we're probably 10, 15 years before we have rights again.
Right.
And that's, that's not scientific, but nothing happens fast in politics.
Right. Well, and Supreme Court at this point is not in favor of repealing that. And I mean, it's going to be a long shot to have the kind of balance in the Supreme Court that would potentially change that law. I would even argue it's going to be longer than 10 to 15 years. Yeah.
Or what's going to happen is you'll get a law, protecting it federally for 4 years. And then the next 4 years, it'll be illegal federally. Like, it's just right. I have no clue. So we need to change. We need to make sure we're working with people that respect our choices. We need to have right communication. We need to be, having good discussions. We need to be supporting each other. I don't know what that looks like, but we need to be doing whatever that means for you and your community. And each state is different. It's just, I appreciate everybody who's offering that, hey, if you need to come to my state for a visit, that's great. Just be careful. You are putting yourself at risk. I'm okay with taking the risk, but
right,
you're taking on that risk. You need to be aware of it. It's going to get worse before it gets better. That's just my gut reaction of that. Mm-hmm. But my wife and I, when we're having the debate, do we stay in Mississippi or not? The debate was, do we move somewhere that matches our values, or do we try to, from the inside, change where we are?
Right.
We've decided to stay. Very carefully, we're going to stay and try to work through it. But I mean, it's a challenge of, all right, do we all just move to Colorado and hang out at Matt's house because we have more values?
It's not good here. You don't want to come here.
Uh-huh.
It's not good. It's not. The weather's bad. There's
mountains, good air, and jobs.
You don't want any of that. Believe me. Don't come here. Yeah.
Or do you just stay where you are and try to improve the area you're in?
Right.
I don't know. We all have to make our own choices.
Right.
We can make it through it. It's just going to suck for a while.
Right. Which I think goes back to the idea of, if this is something you care strongly about, get your contraception taken care of, specifically more permanent versions of that. Gentlemen out there, strongly encourage getting a vasectomy at this point. It can be reversed in the future, but for now, while the law is on your side, get it done. Not that you should probably, if you're listening to this podcast, you're never going to want to get it reversed, but point is, get it done. At this point, do your part to help out in this really tough time. Again, particularly for women, are almost exclusively impacted, almost. So do a little bit of your own help here and go get that vasectomy done. We'll probably have to do a follow-up episode to this one, Dr. J, as more things come out, because we're still a matter of, you can measure it in weeks when we've recorded this after the actual ruling was passed down. So because of that, we're still very much in the gray area, unknown fallout phase of this being passed. We might have to do an update here in a few months as things become clearer, although even in months, things are still usually pretty murky. So we'll see what they're like going forward. Stay vigilant out there. Be aware, we're not attorneys. So this is more of a discussion piece for us to bring the topics to light. We don't know, as we've mentioned multiple times here, how that impacts laws in your state or what that might mean for you. If you are looking for things like crossing state lines for medical treatment or whatever else, really get involved in your community to find out what that means. But we'll keep trying to point resources in front of everyone, such as these doctors that are more willing to help. Cool. Anything else on this front, Dr. J, that should be mentioned at this point? Because I think we're getting up to the point, from my perspective, where I think we're getting into legal territory where we might be ready to listen rather than speak.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'm telling everybody, and it's just good behavior anyway, get your wills, living wills, power of attorneys done.
Gotcha.
Same-sex marriage, got to get it done tomorrow.
Right.
Child-free folks, if you're a couple not married, got to get it done.
Yeah.
Also, remember the government and the healthcare systems blow up if you don't have next of kin. So good time to get your paperwork done. Good time to work with some professionals for that. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy. It's a good way to protect yourself, at least to have that in place. And you should have had it done a while ago anyway. Like, it's just kind of like we all should have had our will a while ago, but we all put it off. So
right. Yeah, well said. I think we'll actually have an episode coming out here in a couple of weeks that focuses a little bit more on the estate planning documents, things like wills and trusts. So we'll very much so dive a little bit deeper into that and what that means here. But it's very much so an important topic for the child-free, but gay marriages, all kinds of things like that may not be recognized by the state going forward. Go ahead and get that stuff in place. And even if you're not any of those things, still get them in place. You need it. It's important. Talk to your financial planner if you've got questions as to why, and they'll dive into it. Outside of that, though, thanks so much for joining us again here on episode 2. We'll definitely try to get some follow-up podcasts in place, an episode to discuss the further ramifications of Roe v. Wade being repealed. Outside of that, again, always contact us with any questions, comments, or requested topics you'd like to hear discussed. childfreepodcast@gmail.com. Outside of that, we'll talk to you all in a week. Thanks so much for joining.
Child-Free Life and Money is an educational and entertainment podcast only. For further disclosure, look at our websites at www.anthrophywealth.com or www.childfreewealth.com. Either way, consult with your financial planner to see if anything we discuss pertains to you. Thanks for listening.